I do not know why that indicated it couldn't connect with the speaker, but it did indicate that the recording had started, so we're going to go ahead and start. I want to welcome people today to this webinar, and the topic for this webinar today is Round 1 PAA CCCT Career Coaches Findings and Observations. It was a study that was conducted by Rutgers in relationship to the Round 1 career coaches in a grant that was quite similar to the grant in respect to that it was the Department of Labor, it was a TAA CCCT grant. So they are actually coming to the end of their grant that will close on September 30th of this year. So that will be the topic for today, and your presenters are Heather McKay. I know all of you have, most of you have probably met Heather before, either at the Career Coaches Workshop or spoken to her. And Heather is the Director of Education and Employment Research Center at the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers. Our second speaker is Renee Edwards, and Renee is a Research Project Manager for the School of Management and Labor Relations Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers. And we also have today Laura Aycock, and Laura has been a career coach for the Round 1 grant, and Laura is going to begin working as the career coach for the Round 3 grant. So we're very happy to have her joining us as well today. And finally, this particular webinar is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor. And as you see below, there is certain information in relationship to the sponsorship and payment for this webinar. So it was funded by them and does not indicate that they agree or disagree with anything that's presented today. So with that, I'm going to advance to the next slide, and then I'm going to turn it over to Heather and Renee.
Hi everybody. We're excited to talk about this report that was written, and the primary author of the report is Suzanne Michael. She's not with us today, but some of you may meet her in the course of the grant. She does a lot of our focused research on career coaches in the project. I wanted to first start by talking with you a little bit about the grant itself, because there are some similarities and some differences with this grant and the grant you all are working on. The grant is called the Colorado Online Energy Training Consortium, COETC for short. As Sue mentioned, it was a Round 1 TAFT grant. It was a 3-year grant, not a 4-year grant. The grant totaled $17.3 million, and there were 15 colleges. All of those colleges were in Colorado. Most of the colleges were in the Colorado system. 2 were outside of the system. So those are just a couple of the differences. The grant goals were to enhance energy-related programming in the state through curriculum development, technology, and mobile learning labs, to complete a redesign of developmental education in the state, to increase student retention, and to facilitate student transition from degree and certificate to a job. Those last 2 goals were not the explicit goals of the grant. They were sort of smaller goals of the grant, but they are very important to the career coach role in the project. And I will say also that this grant differs from the CHIO grant because of the 2 focuses. It was both focused on an industry, but also focused on developmental education. And so that dual focus really in some ways complicated the job of the career coach in the grant. We're going to focus our presentation today on a lot of the work that those coaches did in energy, not in developmental education. But if you are interested in that part of the grant, please do read our report, and I'll give you a link to that at the end of my presentation. So just to tell you a little bit about the career coach role in COETC. The career coaches really had 4 main roles that they were playing. They were guiding students through career exploration and presenting energy training opportunities to them. They were advising and supporting students as they completed the developmental education coursework that they needed to succeed in energy programs, and at schools without energy programming, they were just helping with the developmental education programming. They were also helping students to generally navigate through the college process, and then finally they were providing referrals and support for non-academic issues for students. And non-academic issues could be childcare, housing, lots and lots of things that you all probably have seen in your role as coaches that come up for students. So we looked at a number of things in this report, but some of the really important themes that came out of this were the institutional placement of the coach, which I'm going to talk about a little bit today. And as I talk about these pieces of the project, I hope you think about your own role and where you fit into this and how there may be barriers or challenges that others have faced that could replicate your own experience and maybe help you to improve your role. So I hope we're thinking about all of this information in that way. I'm also going to talk about the integration of the coach role in the colleges, the intentional or intrusive advising as a role of the coach, and the function and impact of coaches across the SOO-ETC consortium. Tried to advance my slides in the wrong way there, but now we've moved on. So we did a number of data collection pieces for this report, and some of these are similar to the data collection that you all are doing, and some of them are a little bit different. You may have heard of some of these from coaches that you all talked to in round one if you do that. So we used qualitative and quantitative data, and we were collecting data in the same ways that we're doing that with you now. One way is through an electronic student case file. What you all use is a stitch-in report, and we'll soon use the hub. But the electronic student case file played that role in our grant, and so we looked at the results from that. So just so you're aware that your stitch-in reports will contribute to something like this, and the information that you put in the hub will contribute to something like this in the future. We also attended, as we have for the CHIO grant as well, any coach forums that were held. We were taking notes and collecting data there, and Renee, who will speak later on this webinar, will be at your coach forum this summer and will be participating to collect data. Additionally, we interviewed all the project leads about the coach role, how the coach fit into the college, and we'll continue to do that work on CHIO as well. We also did interviews with the coaches, and as you all know, you've probably had an interview with either me or someone on my team over the last semester, so you know that we're doing those too. Additionally, we did interviews with students, surveys, and document review. So a lot of varied data collection, and a lot of data collection that is being replicated in the CHIO grant. So it sometimes is nice to know why you're doing something to get all this information together, and a product like this and other products that we've produced for the SOO-ETC grant are nice examples of how that work translates into something. So just so you know a little bit about who the career coaches were when they came in. There were some recruitment tools and qualifications that were needed, and it was specified very clearly what the skills were that the colleges in SOO-ETC wanted for their career coach. Career coaches had to have a college degree. It was ideal that they have 2 years of professional experience. And then there were two really interesting pieces of the job descriptions, which I think are very important for the career coach role. One was that the person has interpersonal and problem-solving skills, and the other, which was a direct quote from the job posting, is that they have the attitude and optimism to inspire confidence. And I think this became a very important piece in who the coaches were that were hired. I also think it was interesting that the colleges were considering this trait as they worked to select coaches and as they worked to fill this role. This is kind of an odd thing for a job description. So who did they end up hiring? All the coaches that were hired had bachelor's degrees. Some of them had master's degrees. Five had one or more master's degrees. One person actually had a master's degree in career coaching as a job. But everybody else had really varied degrees. People had degrees in psychology, counseling, education, communications, English, human resources, and management. And people came from a variety of different backgrounds. There were coaches that were themselves non-traditional students, which was helpful for their role, and we talk about that a little bit in the report. And we also had some people who had experience in education previously, and a few who actually had experience at a local workforce center or one-stop, which coaches described as being helpful to them in their relationships with those institutions. Integration at the college was a really important issue, and integration differed in many ways. And I think as we're talking to you all in CHIO, one of the reasons that I wanted to bring up this piece of the report especially is because I think this is true for you all as well. How you integrate into college and where you fit in the college makes a difference in your experience there. So there were a lot of questions that emerged in integration in the college. One was really that the career coach position in many ways could duplicate or undercut what was already in place. A lot of coaches maybe were sort of trying to find their way between what student services already existed and the role that they were going to play. And that was a real challenge for coaches in round one. How do I fit into this college? How do I fit this new role into already existing structures, and how do I make this position important? And so that became a challenge. It became a challenge to talk about what kind of roles they would take so that they didn't take jobs away from folks at Student Services, how they could supplement that role, and really each coach navigated that path a little bit differently. The benefits and costs of real integration and institutionalization was another question that really came up a lot with the coaches. So how institutionalized were they going to get in this setting? We knew this was a finite time period, right? This was a 3-year grant. So where were the coaches going to fit in, and how were they going to begin to think about how they worked with the other departments in the college? And if that position couldn't be sustained, how was that going to work as well? Where would those positions go? So it was a challenge for each coach, and each coach had to navigate that process individually, as I'm sure you're doing as well. And then, again, another piece of this is how to utilize the coach. And I think that became especially interesting in the SOO grant because of the dual goals of the grant, that developmental education and that energy goal. So it became challenging as to where you would want the coach to fit in. Does the coach fit in on the energy side of the grant where there's a career pathway, but maybe students don't need as much career counseling because they already have a strong idea about what they want to do in their head? Should they be working with the developmental education students who are very early on in their pathway and may have to change decisions about their career choices based on their skills in math and English? So those challenges came up a lot for the coaches. And coaches really had to find their way, whether they were going to choose to work with one group of students over the other, try to do both, which became a challenge for a lot of people because that's a huge caseload and a lot of students. So there was a lot of navigation in terms of how they would be utilized. And the project lead certainly worked with coaches to do this and help with this process. So where did the coaches end up? As this whole process was sorting out, these questions were being addressed. Coaches ended up in very different places, and it really depended on a number of things which we pulled out from our data analysis. The first was how the college viewed the coach role. And colleges viewed the coach role as different things. There were a couple of colleges who thought this coach role is redundant. We don't really need this coach role. We don't know where to put them. We don't know what we're going to do with it. And in those instances, the coaches had a lot of trouble. There were other people who said, you know, we really do need a coach. And we need the coach to concentrate on energy, and so we're going to stick the coach in this place in the energy department and have them focus on energy classes, energy students, only that. There were other people that said, other colleges that said, well, we want the coach to be based in our student services department, and we want that coach to deal directly with incoming students. So the coach ended up focusing on incoming students almost solely. Students who were taking their active placer for the first time, helping to direct them to different programming at the college or helping to address certain needs that they might have. There were also other questions about where the coaches ended up, and one of those important questions actually ended up being space. Where do we have room in a taxed environment in terms of space to put the coach? And so coaches ended up in a variety of different spaces, places, kinds of offices, and that spatial placement made a real difference in what they did as a coach. Space was very, very important. If coaches had their own office that they could close a door in and that they didn't share with someone else, they could have different kinds of conversations with students than if they were in a cubicle or a hallway or in a shared office. And so really what the coach did and where the coach ended up, that space question was an important one. Who was the coach serving was the other piece, and I've talked about this throughout the project, but it really was important for COETC coaches to identify. Who were they going to serve in this grant? Were they going to serve incoming students, energy students solely, dev ed students? All of these questions were very important in the role they ended up playing. And finally, the structure of the college student services was really crucial to the role that the coach was playing because coaches had to figure out how they would fit into that structure. And it was very dependent on what student services was already doing a supplemental role for them. So I pulled some energy colleges and just wanted to tell you a little bit about where those coaches sit so you can think about your own role and where you're sitting and exactly how you fit into your college. One was at NJC. The coach fit into the counseling services suite. There were 3 coaches in the project that were placed directly in energy departments near energy classes and where energy coursework was happening, and also where energy students went through the hallways.
Hey Heather, yeah. Can I stop you for just a second? There's some construction going on behind someone, And so if it is not you, would the person where the construction is going on please mute your speaker so we don't hear drills? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so then there are also those instances in round one where coaches have gone between multiple campuses. And this has been a tremendous challenge for those coaches in round one that have had to do this. The distances are very far. Building relationships with students has been a challenge because they aren't in one place all the time. Connecting with students in a variety of ways. This has been one way. Remote coaching did not come up a lot in the round one grants for a lot of coaches, but this was one way where it did, where coaches began to use electronic tools, phone, and email as ways to connect with students because they were running to different campuses and not in one place all the time. So as I've been talking about, placement for the coach really mattered. As we interviewed coaches and talked to coaches, most of them said that their location was an important piece. It was an important piece for a variety of reasons. It was an important piece because students could either pass by or not pass by, come to their offices. It was an important piece because students had to find them, so could students find them? The other important pieces of location and placement were how can I do my job in the different areas that I'm in? And I talked a little bit about having your own office or having different kinds of spaces and how that influences the kinds of conversations you can have with students, the questions that students can ask, and also the comfort level of students. So coaches who were near energy programs, and I pulled things focused on those energy coaches again here, when they were near the classes, when they were in the hallways where energy was happening, they described their location as being strategic and purposeful. They also said it increased their visibility, student access, and interaction. So this was a really important piece of them getting students onto their caseload and having multiple interactions with students, not just one. So that it wasn't just a single visit and then done. They would encounter students all the time. They would be able to find students and know where to find them, and students could also find the coach. Let me move on to advising. So the advising role of the coach is something that I also wanted to bring up because I think you all are working with this piece as well at this point in your jobs. You're doing advising, you've got a caseload, you've got students you're seeing every day. And advising is something else we talk to the career coaches a lot about. We obviously know that the literature shows that advising makes a difference. And advising makes a difference in a lot of ways, but one of the important ways that advising makes a difference is in terms of retention. Literature is very clear that when students have a pathway, and especially a career pathway, they are more likely to be retained. So with that in mind, advising became a crucial role of keeping retention up, which if you go back to one of my beginning slides, you'll remember that that was one of the goals of the grant, so it's important. And I'll also say that advising on college campuses, as you all know very well, differs really tremendously. So it can be that very base ad hoc advising that occurs at registration where maybe an advisor just helps the student register for classes or helps pinpoint what a student needs or the classes that they need to take in a certain order, that kind of piece. And then there's sort of the far end of that. There are all ranges in between until you get to intentional and intrusive advising. And the hope was that in COETC that the coaches would do this intentional and intrusive advising. And so what is intentional advising? And I'll talk about that a little bit and how it was defined in COETC. And these definitions can certainly vary, but this is also how the literature usually defines intentional advising. It's proactive, it's action-oriented interaction with students. Within the COETC grant, academic and career goals were identified and set. That was supposed to be a true goal of the coaches in this kind of advising. They were supposed to be involved in assisting and supporting student success, including non-academic issues for students. So working with students on those other issues that might come up. And coaches dealt with a variety of them, financial issues, housing issues, child care issues, transportation issues. Coaches talked about a wide variety of these kinds of issues emerging with students and having to work with students to solve those problems. And different coaches found different ways to do that and to do that effectively. Another really important role that the coaches were supposed to play, and is certainly an important role in that retention piece, is preventative action. So coaches were really supposed to see if a student wasn't doing well use things like early alert systems and mid-course grades from teachers, references from teachers, to find out if a student on their caseload or a student in one of the programs that they were serving wasn't doing well, and then try to interact with that student prior to prevent dropout or to prevent failure in that class. So all of those roles were things that the coaches got into. Or were meant to be doing. Advising in COETC was not always as it was prescribed in the intentional advising ideas that were shared with the coaches and asked to be, and that's really because of the different populations that the coaches served, the different priorities that colleges set for the coaches. But I will say that all 15 coaches did uniformly provide academic advising for students. The other pieces of advising really varied depending on how the coach was positioned within the college, how many students the coach was serving, and really the role that was set up for that coach within the institution. And I'm sure this is true for all of you as well in your own roles. So one important piece of the advising was how students got to the coach. And I wanted to talk about this as well because I think this is important to you all as you create your caseloads, and you probably have ideas already about what works and what doesn't. But I think we can learn some important lessons from the COETC coaches. So at some colleges, meeting with the coaches was mandatory, and at other colleges it was voluntary. And the mandatory coaches often had, the coaches where it was who had that mandatory situation often had more meetings with students and different kinds of interaction. They often also found it easier to get their caseloads to a point where they were meeting the goals of the grant. So that was an important piece. Some coaches served as teachers, and this also was a really good way for them to get caseloads together and also to build a lot of trust with students. So teachers taught two kinds of courses in the COETC grant. One was kind of a AAA course or a soft skills course. One of the coaches who's presenting with us today, Laura, taught a course that I'll talk about in a little bit. There were also developmental education courses that coaches taught. So some coaches were teaching English and math basic courses and connecting with students in those ways. Another way that coaches integrated themselves in the COETC grant to find students and to begin advising students was that they worked with teachers to make advisement part of the course requirements. And that might mean that the coach was in the classroom with students a couple of days a week or a couple of hours a week. It might be that teachers referred students to the coach and had them do sort of a small assignment, maybe an ungraded assignment that went with connecting with the coach. So those different tactics were used throughout the grant. How did coaches work with students? And I'll say that coaches work with students, as we've talked about throughout this webinar, in a true variety of ways, and this is just a subset of those ways that coaches could work with students. One way that coaches work with students is that they reviewed active placer scores at the start of their entrance into the program. And this may or may not fit with what you all are doing, because this was truly a very developmental education focused in round one. But what happened here was that coaches were able to help students to talk about where they would go and where on their career pathway they should start, and to discuss placement plans and options. Oftentimes when students didn't do well in math in their AccuPlacer, they had to make different decisions, and so coaches participated in this process at the AccuPlacer score moment to discuss with them what their options might be and what pathway they might want to take. Another thing that coaches did was take some of the general student service tasks off of student services and discuss course load decisions and registration with students and to help students to register. Additionally, after students were in courses, if they weren't doing well or something wasn't working out, coaches helped students to change their course load post-registration, both before add drop period and after add drop period. Another really important role that coaches played, and I'm sure you all are thinking about, is the goal setting and tracking of student progress. So that involves both academic advising, a lot of soft skill development, and career advising for students, and coaches did all of those things. Identifying academic risks, that preventative measure that I talked about on the last slide, was a very important role for the coaches and something that I think really can over time show the impact of the coach position. And that was coaches using early alert systems that they had them, working with students on academic probation, talking closely with teachers in the different programs to find out what students might need help, and really intervening at certain points to see how they could help them. Finally, a lot of coaches, in order to let folks know about them, let folks know about their presence on campus, began to participate in college and program orientation. So they would be there, talk about the services that they provide, make appointments with students, or tell them where their office was, whatever was appropriate in that event to really share the information that there is a career coach on campus and this career coach is here to serve you. One of the really nice quotes from the report that I wanted to bring to your attention was on really that identifying academic risks piece. And someone described their role as being to determine the causes of poor academic performance and identify proactive steps to engage in. So coaches help students to do that, and I think that's a very exciting and interesting role that the coaches play, and obviously, as I talked about earlier, one that the literature backs up strongly. Career counseling, of course, is a really important part of your role, and it was an important part of the energy coaches' role in this whole grant. And so coaches did a couple of things with career coaching. The focus of career coaching really did differ based on energy and non-energy colleges, so I'm going to focus mostly on energy colleges. At energy colleges, coaches found for the most part had already decided on a career path. So they were at a different place in their coaching with students. They were with students who were motivated, who had already chosen the path they wanted to go down, and so then they could think about different kinds of things, like stacking and latticing, or how you're doing in your classes, or maybe dealing with those non-academic issues. But they weren't really helping students choose a career path. This really changed the interactions with students a little bit, and the DevEd coaches in COE2C had a different experience with their students. And it really meant for the coaches in the energy programs, I think that they did more limited career and academic advising than they had thought they would do originally, but it did open the door for them to think about other activities and find other ways to interact with students and create value on campus. And I think there were some really interesting ways that coaches did that. Another piece that also occurred, which might be occurring on your campus, is that they were also in departments where faculty had relationships with industry, had relationships with employers, and so often faculty were providing a lot of career-related information. So the coaches need to work within this existing atmosphere of information and find a way to fit in themselves, and a lot of coaches did find ways to do that, and also found ways to supplement what faculty were doing, and that was certainly an important process. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the primary career advising areas, and I'm going to jump through this kind of quickly because I realize that we need to get to Renee and we need to get to Laura. And I've gone on a long time. So one thing that they did was advisement on possible career pathways. And this advising involved finding alternative pathways for students maybe who didn't have the math skills to be in the course that they wanted to be in, or to be in the program that they wanted to be. Talking about jobs within the region, making sure that students were aligning their academics with jobs that they could get depending on what locality they wanted to be in or what community they wanted to live in. And also arranging ways to meet with industry. Coaches were really creative about this in round one and did a fabulous job putting career fairs together and other events for students to meet and interact with industry folks, which was very useful for the student population. Another thing that they did often was job readiness and job searching with students. A lot of the energy coaches focused a ton of their attention on this job readiness piece. And that was a really great role for them. And I think maybe not the role that all of them thought they were going to do when they came in, but a role that they adopted and moved through really well. There were workshops and individual sessions. Laura, who's on the phone today, did a wonderful program called A-Game, and she can talk about that a little bit when she comes on. But coaches did other kinds of workshops and sessions as well to get students ready for jobs, think about jobs. They did a lot of resume and cover letter writing activities with students, working with students individually, doing group sessions. They practiced interview skills with students, bringing students in for mock interviews. getting employers involved in mock interviews, those kinds of things. And they also help students to do proactive job searches and think about their own personal marketing strategies. So for some coaches, this meant helping students work with LinkedIn. For other coaches, it meant helping students work on their emails, those kinds of activities in order to really get themselves out there into job searching. Finally, coaches looked a lot at internships and job placement, and this was a role that a lot of the energy coaches in particular did. So activities for this included networking with local employers, coaches going out to local employers and talking to them, working with local employers who might be involved in advisory boards, or doing other kinds of outreach activities to talk about the program at the school, the new nature of the program, and really get the awareness that there were students that were graduating that could be hired. Connecting with HR folks in the industry and also shop stewards was another important role that coaches played, keeping those connections alive and finding ways to help students find out about job availability and also help HR representatives know that there were students there. And then finally, helping students to overcome barriers to employment. This became an important piece for some students, and coaches worked to help them get through transportation barriers, childcare barriers, police records, different pieces like that that could be barriers to employment. And really, coaches did a great job in trying to get that intervention early on so that it wouldn't, that the student wouldn't have to be dealing with this right when the job was at their doorstep. And I'm going to turn it over to Renee now to talk about some of the promising practices and also some of the things that we found out.
Hi everyone. I think I've actually been able to talk with most of you, and just like Heather, I've had the benefit of being involved in the round one and now also in SHIO as far as doing research and analysis. And we have found that the career coach role is really so rich and has so many different various elements to it. So one of the things that we wanted to do today is really go into more depth as to what the promising practices are that came out of round one, and also some of the challenges. And since I've talked to most of you, I know a lot of these things are things that you're already doing in terms of promising practices. Some of them are kind of new things that you might want to integrate, and then some of the challenges that we're going to talk about in a minute are certainly things that I know some of you are coming up against. And so sometimes it can be beneficial just to know that you know, you're not the only one out there that's run up against these challenges. So one of the first things that came out of round one was really that orientation and training was very important. And one of the coaches, actually the coach at Ames, actually spent a full 6 weeks in a formal training, shadowing other advisors, learning the FERPA rules, and really getting to know student services and all those things, and that was something that they felt like was a real benefit. The next is really supervision, and in terms of this, we mean supervision by a clinical or counseling type personnel. And one of the reasons that the coaches told us that they really found this was beneficial is because, and I know a lot of you have run into this, the coaching role is not just about academic or counseling type coaching, but also there's emergency coaching involved. There's a lot of non-academic coaching that comes into play here. Anything from domestic violence situations to just other types of personal issues that the students may have, time management, daycare, those sorts of things. In those cases, the coaches actually really found that having a clinical type person that they could discuss cases with or could work directly with them, with some of the students, as far as supervision, was actually very beneficial. Early alert systems was something that came up as a promising practice, and Heather talked about this a little bit already. Most of your colleges do have early alert systems or are in the process of instituting a formal early alert system. And I know a lot of you kind of deal with early alert systems in an informal manner. And the coaches from round one really found that finding out ahead of time the students that were struggling and having problems was a real benefit, because they could get in there early on and really help the students address their problems, maybe get them physically to a tutor or something like that that would really help break down those barriers for them. As Heather also mentioned, coaches as classroom instructors, and some of you are doing workshops as far as soft skills and resume building. Those types of things are really promising practices that came out of round one, in that the coaches were able to identify with students early on. They were able to kind of normalize seeing the coach. The students already knew the coach. They felt comfortable with the coach because they were dealing with the coach in the classroom setting. Mandated coaching kind of goes along with that, in that if the students were coming into the program and they had an initial mandated advisement session with the coach, they already were familiar with that coach. They knew exactly how to go in and talk to the coach, and it also sort of normalize the idea of getting career counseling or even non-academic counseling, because the literature tells us that there's a certain stigma that's associated with needing to talk to an advisor or a counselor about something, that students feel like maybe it's not a normal type of thing. And so the mandated coaching really normalizes that situation, so it's normal for everyone to have to go talk to the coach. And so in that case, they feel more comfortable with the situation, and if something crops up later on, they're able to go talk to that coach much easier. The other thing that coaches pointed out that was a benefit to them really engaging with students was the learning style assessment. They were able to interact with the students to do learning style assessments and social style assessments. The students found it fun. They also found it beneficial. So it was a way for the coaches to really relate with the students, and also to help them understand what their learning styles and their social styles were, and really to engage with the students. Workforce centers. A lot of coaches ended up telling us that regular meetings with the workforce centers were beneficial, and also attending the workforce center meetings that the workforce center regularly holds were ways that the coaches could sit in on the meetings and really understand changes in the labor market, changes in the workforce, understand some of the lingo that workforce centers talk about, and some of the funding that workforce centers have available. And the one other thing that coaches found relative to workforce centers that was helpful was actually sitting in with their students and the case manager at the workforce center, and really being part of that role with their student and with the case manager. In those cases, coaches told us that they were more likely to get referrals from workforce center case managers after doing that a couple of times. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the challenges. The title and ambiguity of the role as far as career coaches came up a lot, and I know this is something that has come up for some of you as well. Really, career coaches from round one found that their title, career coach, just wasn't as broad as what they were actually doing. That there's just so much more that's involved in the coaching process. And also the ambiguity of the role, that career coaches really had a hard time in the beginning, especially feeling out how they fit into the college and what their role was in terms of coaching the students, the workforce centers, all the different facets and elements of that career coach role. Caseload size was also a very big challenge, and I know as far as your grant that the coaches really, you range as far as a very small caseload to a very large caseload. That really doesn't change the way that you have all these different facets of your role. But caseload size did pose a challenge, especially for those colleges that had very large targets, because being able to actually do the intentional advising one-on-one with over 500 students really did pose a problem. The other thing that poses a problem is the delay of the launch of classes, because if one of your primary roles is to coach students and bring them into programs and you don't have that program to actually put the students in, then of course that creates a problem in terms of your role. In round one, we did also find that the delay of the launch of online programs was an issue for a lot of students because they just didn't have the access to come to a traditional classroom, or they lacked daycare, or they lacked transportation, etc. And so that was a challenge that did come out of round one. Competition for students is another thing that came out of the project, and we found that was especially in terms of other advising departments on the campus, and that advisors all have certain targets that they needed to make that they had to report to their funders. And so we found that there was some competition among advising departments, and even departments and advisors that were very overworked were still wanting to keep their reporting high, and so they felt there was a risk of referring to the career coach. Documentation of working with students and activity logs. The activity logs, as Heather mentioned, we used were slightly different in round one, but basically your stitched in report is the same kind of operating tool, and the Career Hub moving forward will be that. We're really hoping that the Career Hub does help with some of your concerns. I've heard your concerns about documenting students and difficulty in working with the Excel, some of those things. Hopefully the Career Hub will help that in the future. One of the challenges that came out was regarding gender, and this was an issue that came up especially in the energy colleges because the students that were enrolling in the energy programs were primarily male. However, the career coaches tended to be mostly female. So the career coaches did wonder on some level whether or not some of the students felt comfortable coming to talk to them about their issues, especially their more personal issues, because of the gender difference. And then one thing that Heather also has already mentioned is the time-limited position, the fact that all grants have finite funding and finite time associated with them. So that was one of the issues that the coaches have had to deal with, as I'm sure you're adjusting to as well. How much time do you invest in something? What do you do? How do you integrate with the college? What does this mean in terms of the grant ending? What does this mean in terms of sustainability? So those are some of the issues that came out of round one that I feel like also are things that you're having to deal with. And I know we're getting limited on time here, so I'm just going to turn it over to Laura at this point.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura, and I'm a career coach at Red Rocks for the Water Quality Program. I just want to touch on a few things and offer a few suggestions. I was someone who was affected by the title of career coach. I was also at a location very isolated from any of the classes in water quality, because water quality operates at the time was operating in a very small building off the main campus, and my office was actually located on the main campus. So this kind of presented a challenge in the beginning of the work. I didn't really get to know the instructors very well. I didn't really get to know the students that well. And one of the solutions I found in this first part was to make a connection with one or two instructors and have them encourage students to come and see me, if it meant offering extra credit and different things like that. I was able to actually meet with a good amount of students, but what really helped was this past, before this fall semester, I actually moved into our brand new building for water quality, and my office was actually located right, the first office when students walked in. And this really helped me to get to know a lot more of the instructors. And also being able to be outside and greeting students and interacting with them from the moment they walked in the door. The title of career coach is something that I really struggled with from the beginning, because it was really hard for me to get the department chair of water quality and the instructor to know what the role of a career coach was supposed to be. They heard career and coach, so they just assumed that meant resume development, mock interviews, working on soft skills, which was definitely part of it, but it was really hard to get them to see it as being this intrusive or intentional advising piece. So I never really got to work with students on a lot of that because I didn't really have any support from outside of other career coaches. But the department they just don't understand what that is. And that the department has their own advisor already, and there was a really strong feeling from the department chair that unless he really felt the advisor of the program should be someone who already graduated the program. So I never really, I really have focused more on that literal sense of the career coach world. I did do advising with students from the Workforce Center, so I did advise students who, you know, on what they would be taking in their first semester if they were coming from the Workforce Center. One thing that I found that really helped was this past year we implemented a soft skills training program called Bring Your A Game to Work. This last semester, I should say the fall semester, we implemented it in an online format, and I worked with students that way. It wasn't as successful as we hoped, so this past semester we actually implemented it into an all-day workshop, which I hosted on 2 different Saturdays, and students were offered extra credit from their class if they attended. And we had pretty good, I think both days I had about 15 students at each of the workshops. So that was a great way for me to get to know students. And like Heather, I believe, said before, is once they can see your face and they know who you are, they're more likely to come and ask for help. And a lot of that help has extended past the resume. And I've been able to offer them, you know, other services such as, hey, do you know about tutoring? Do you know about our Connected Success program? Oh, yeah, I heard you mention this. Did you know about this? So even though it's been advertised as I help with all these things to get a job, it's in a way it's helped it evolve into something bigger. I really think that's all the things that I have. I don't know if people have individual questions on what may have worked and what may not have worked, but I also don't want to hog up the time. So I'll bring it back to Heather or Renee.
That's great, Laura. Thank you so much. I think Laura's perspective is really helpful, and Laura and Allie I know is on the line as well. So Allie, if there's something that you wanted to talk about with your experience from round 1, Allie was at OJC, is the coach at OJC. So please pipe in and share. I think it's great to create a community of coaches. This role is kind of new in a lot of the states that you're working in and at your colleges. So I think the perspectives from others are important. I've created a couple discussion questions. I don't also know if anybody out in the audience has questions, but please pose them. I guess Sue wants us to pose them in the chat. But I've also created a series of questions, and then I've additionally created a handout that I'll send to all of you, which were questions that emerged out of round 1 that I think might be questions you want to think about in terms of your role on campus for round 2. So I'll send that out as kind of a mid-course thought process for everybody. Sue, do we have any questions? Did anything come in?
I haven't seen anything come in, so why don't we just pose the 2 questions that you have. And for those participating in the webinar, some are on the phone, so if you would like to pose your questions, just please unmute your phone and ask the question and then mute it as the question is answered. Or you can use the chat area as well to post your comments to the questions that are here. So I will turn it back to you, Heather and Renee, and why don't we just start with that first question.
So we were curious, and Laura, please pipe in as well about ways that people have been integrated into their colleges' services to students. So how are you all positioned in your colleges?
Would someone like to share their information? As I mentioned, just unmute your phone, or you could also place your information in the chat window as well. So please feel free to participate.
Well, we've got a quiet group out there. So I'll just go through our other discussion questions and see if anybody has anything to say about these. It would be great to hear your perspective, certainly. How do you recruit students to the programs and or caseloads? I think this is an important question to think about. And also maybe there are some lessons that can be learned from round one. I think it was really interesting at how Laura talked about how her teaching and workshop helped her to build her caseload. And there are lots of examples like that in round one, coaches being creative and coming up with different ways to do this. And I'm sure that, that in your projects there are some great activities to date that you all have done. If anybody wants to share those, we'd welcome them. Another question that I think is important is what are the patterns that you're seeing with your interactions with students in career advisement, academic advisement, job readiness, and environmental patterns. Some of those environmental and social issues can be some of those challenging issues to deal with. So it's important to go through those.
Heather, it looks like Teresa may be on the microphone, so I just wanted to, if she was, because I see an icon there. So Teresa, did you want to share something, or was that just an accident? I'll mute my side of the line, and if you would like to share something, Teresa, please go ahead. It may have been an accident, but as information, if you would are contributing or participating via the microphone in lieu of the telephone, you need to click on the talk button, and when you click on that talk button, you have access to the microphone, and then when you are finished, you would click it again to mute it so others can use the microphone as well. So Heather, go ahead and keep going. Thank you.
Sure. A couple of other discussion questions that I posted on here to discuss are, is your caseload target being reached? Was it realistic from the start? If not, what would be more realistic in terms of caseload counts? And I think caseload matters in how you do your job as well. So to think about what your own caseload is and what that means in terms of your interaction with students is certainly important. And what skills have you found that are critical for you to do your job? I think those are really important pieces as well. Are there things that you needed to learn or relearn? Did you come with all the skills you needed? What was important in order to do this job? And just so you all know, I think this has been sent out to you. I think Sue sent this report out to you, but the report is available at this link. Please take a look at it. We'd love for more of you to read it. We'd also love your feedback. That would be wonderful to get. In addition to this, there are other reports from the Round 1 grant. I think there are 20 reports in total from the Round 1 grant up on that site. You can take a look at any of them that might be of interest to you. And it will also give you a better idea of the reports that will be coming out for CHIO. And we will be releasing reports over the summer and then reports over the fall for CHIO. So reporting is coming quite quickly for the grant. So it can give you a nice idea of what's up and coming. Just so you all know, our contact information, Renee and myself, our contact info is here. I gave you Laura's on the previous slide, but I think I speak for all of us when I say feel free to contact any of us with questions or comments. We'd be very happy to hear from you. And that's all I've got to do.
Okay, with that, I would please ask each of you participating in this webinar today. I've put the SurveyMonkey link in the chat area, and we would very much appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. So all you would need to do is at the close just click on that link and go out and give us your feedback. And I also want to thank Heather and Renee and Laura for being here today and sharing all this great information regarding the experiences that they've had and the results of this great document that they put together. And I encourage all of you to read this. I've read through the document, and it really gave some great insights into what's happening, what happened in relationship to the Round 1 grant. Again, the benefits and the obstacles that the career coaches experienced. And I think that you'll find that there are definitely some things that complement the experiences that you've had thus far in this grant. So with that, I'm going to close out and stop the recording. I thank all of you for participating today. And do remember to fill out the SurveyMonkey that we've posted here. And also, when you exit this software, please click on the red X in the right-hand corner, and that will take you out of the session. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Talk to you soon.